Welcome back to another episode on my writing process. My name is Alex Jagir, and if this is your first time listening, I encourage you to go back and listen to some past episodes about my writing process and even my very first episode introducing myself and my writing and what I intend to do with it. As a simple recap, though, I am an epic fantasy writer working on my first book. I'm in the very middle of my first draft, which I hope to complete in January, and that's where I'm at for my first book. I've been doing this, I guess you can call it a series. I guess it's kind of turned into it on my writing process, and I'm sure that will evolve, develop, and change over time. But for right now, I kind of wanted to give an overview on my process for writing, just to give you an understanding of where I come from, how I write my books, and my thoughts on different methods for that. The purpose of this episode is polishing the plot. So, how do I come up with my baseline plot for the story? I've said this before in past episodes, but just as a little reminder, it's not a step by step process. So when I'm thinking of a book to write, I don't think of the setting first and then the characters and then the plot and then the magic system or however order. It all does kind of work together, but I wanted to tackle each subject differently or separately. I think probably the important thing to do first is to define what the plot is. There are several different ways to describe the plot and what it does, but I just have here a kind of simple definition of it. The plot contains the story elements of your book, specifically the introductions, expositions, the rising action and circumstances that culminate into the climax, and then the resolution. So it kind of consists of those parts, and that's very defining way to put the plot. But we'll do a little deeper dive into it next. I've also talked on this a little bit before about being a gardener or an architect with writing. If you haven't heard of that before, a gardener is more or less someone who maybe has a general idea of the story where they want it to go, but they write and they allow the story to take them. George R. R. Martin is I wouldn't say necessarily proponent of this. This is just how he writes. And, well, I guess he's been spending 11 years on this most recent book. So hopefully it works out for him. But then the other side of the spectrum, which is where I'm at, is the architect, where whether it's 50%, 80%, you have to have a pretty significant portion of your plot, characters, understanding of the book, where it wants to go before you even start writing. And that's where I'm at. I started out wanting to be a gardener. I think just the thought of it sounded cool, just kind of see where the plot takes you, and it kind of takes you on your own adventure, even as the writer. But that burnt me out, and it even got to the point where I wanted to just stop writing, and I even did for a while because I just thought that I wasn't a writer. I mean, putting it that way. It wasn't until though that I realized that in my life I am very organized. I need things a certain way, and I'm very particular like that. And so naturally, it just fits where it should follow suit in my writing as well. And so once I started to focus on knowing what the plot of the story is in those big moments and seeing the whole picture before I even start the first chapter, really increased my writing efficiency, gave me confidence in my writing because I could see where I was going with the story, and it just made my writing a whole lot better. So that's where I am with how I plan my stories. So this outlining stage, or I guess determining the plot before I even outline, really. I like to think of the plot before I even put down chapter by chapter a specific outline for the book. So moving on to the bulk of this episode, how do I refine and polish and kind of get set on a plot before I even get to the outlining stage of my book? I've been working several years now world building this universe in my mind, putting a lot of stuff in, of course, actually writing it down. So I have specific magic systems in place and where I want the overall story to go by the end of all these books that I want to write. And so I already have several stories in mind that I can kind of pick and choose from on this timeline and time scale that I think would be interesting and fun to write with exciting characters and especially the plot. So I'm not really thinking of, okay, what's an original idea that I can come up with that's in its own world, its own universe, and stands completely by itself. Because I've already thought of those things for the most part. So many of the stories that I write, I've thought of over the years, and so I already have a good understanding of it. And at that point, it's just a matter of picking which ones I think would be the best fit in the stories I do want to tell in my universe. There's obviously too many that I can choose from that I can write while I am alive. So I have to really discern which ones would be the best to tell. I want to go more into um, determining which stories to tell, but I also don't want to give too much away on the stories that I want to tell and my kind of idea and goal for telling my series and books that I want to write. So maybe in a future episode, or if not an episode in future books, you will see. Also, when I talk about the plot for my books, I'm kind of lumping in with that the magic system. That obviously is another discussion too by itself. However, because my magic system is such an important piece of the story that I want to tell in my world and universe, it's very important that basically the plot and magic system tie in together and are nearly one and the same. Obviously, you have beats of the plot that the characters follow, maybe that the characters create themselves, that are definitely separate from the magic system. However, I want that theme to still stay in place throughout the book. After I decide on the specific story I want to tell in my timeline, I'm just gonna throw out random. Let's just say it's in the year 1500 in my book, and it's the civilization has come up. Here's these specific characters, and this special event has happened in my magic system. That's say like pump some life into this region in my book, and I think okay, that's an exciting time to write this story. After that, the big thing is thinking of the big thematic parts in my book. And that usually consists of a really cool introduction or something at least enough to get the reader's attention, get my attention. And then the big points throughout the book, that might be 3 or 4 different things, maybe even up to 10. These specific places throughout the book where I want my characters to be in, a situation I want them to be, big decision they have to make, and then especially the end of the book. So I kind of envision it like a movie, if you will, trying to think of these big parts that I want to bring to life. And so even though that might not create a smooth line from beginning to end, and I know exactly the story that I want to tell with all the little details, I know, okay, here's a space where some writing will happen to get from point A, and then point B is this exciting thing that happens where something is revealed about the magic system or one of these characters. And I think, okay, that's a cool part to bring out this character. And then I'm writing notes as I go along. Here's how this develops this character's storyline. And so throughout the book, I have these big parts that I think of. And even though it doesn't form that smooth whole, I can kind of see what the picture will be like when it is complete. So by the end of thinking of the plot for the story, again, this is before I outline, so there's obviously a lot of stuff I haven't done yet with specifically planning on story elements. But before I even get down to outlining, I want to know how the story starts. I want to know the big picture elements that happen in the story, so I can see where it's going. Generally, where the character stories will end up by the end, and then kind of how the book ends. Now, the reason why I'm kind of hesitant to say I definitely know for sure how the book ends, I know how these character arcs go, is because during the actual outlining stage in my book, that stuff definitely changes. But going into the outlining, if I know where I'm going, it helps me outline a lot better rather than just sitting there and thinking from scratch. Especially chronologically. I do think of things chronologically, it helps. However, I might jump ahead to the end of the book because I feel like it might help me picture better the final thing where the characters stand. And it's helpful sometimes to kind of work backwards from that, especially if there's a lot of intricacies and maybe some foreshadowing early on. It's hard for me sometimes to say if I'm outlining chapter 3 or 4 and I don't really think of foreshadowing elements there, and I'm not quite sure how the ending plays out. But if I know the end, I can kind of work backwards and say, okay, here's the ending. Here's these cool things that get revealed or resolved. So, what would it look like the step before that to get to this huge revelation? And then I just keep working back and back and back, and it helps me determine what foreshadowing elements I want to put in, different character steps along the way. For instance, if a character at the end of the book becomes, say, your typical hero, but at the beginning of the book, I have them being, say, it's some old man who's a hermit or something. So what elements along the way have brought him from that end point, and from being a like a recluse or whatever, bring him to the hero of the story. So it's helpful sometimes to go front to back rather than chronologically, but that just depends on kind of how my mind works at the moment. In the next episode or two, I'll be touching on my actual outlining. So, all these elements that I've talked about, the plot, the setting, the characters, a little bit of the magic system. Finally, once I have all that in my head and I have a really good foundation for what I want my book to be, I finally sit down and I outline. Not 100% outline. I actually have 2 or 3 phases of my outlining. But the next episode, I believe the next one, I will be covering kind of the first segment of my outlining process and what that looks like. Thank you for watching again. If you like this video, please like. If you haven't subscribed already, definitely subscribe so you can stay up to date on my new episodes. And then also, if you're feeling especially generous, please share with your friends. And then you can also, if you want, drop a comment if you have something to add to this discussion, or if you want to point out something to me, or have any disagreements on something weird that I said. I also have a contact form on my website, so if you want to talk one-on-one and discuss anything, feel free to reach out to me there. As always, I appreciate your support and watching my videos, and I hope to deliver to you some grand epic fantasy books in the future. Thank you again, and I will see you next time.